So welcome back to our class. Um, Today, what we're going to talk about, um, yeah, as much we are going to cover as much as we can regarding, unit unit 7, and now what we are looking at is the characteristics of written language, but we are looking at it from a writer's view, like whoever is writing. As our learners are writing, what are some of the characteristics of written language that can, in some ways, affect how they write, be it negatively or positively. And again, today I will try to summarize the notes, but then you have them in front of you. You can always have a look at them. Excuse me. You can always have a look at them, go back to the notes and and cover the notes that you have, and that's what we're going to do today. Okay. So what are the characteristics that we're going to look at? So the characteristics of written language here, we're talking about like permanence, production time, distance, orthography, complexity, vocabulary, and formality. And then we'll cover all of those as quickly as possible. All right. So when it comes to writing, we all know that when something is written down and delivered, it's in its final form to its intended writer. Like when you do that, so as a writer, then you lose a certain power, such as the power to change. So, for example, if you write something and you give it to whoever needs to read it, it's permanent. And then you lose some power, like you forfeit your power in terms of, you can't change it anymore. You cannot clarify as much unless it's followed up with a speech of some sort or clarifying questions. But for the most part, it's like, to clarify, you can really do that, and you cannot withdraw. So the prospect of perhaps the most significant contributor to making writer a scary operation. So that's just to say that when everybody, like especially the learners, right? I don't know about you as students, but when the writing is sent out, like why are they so hesitant with writing and giving in their final product? Is because of this aspect of permanence. Like they can't really do much about it, and then they get a final grade, for instance. So they become really vulnerable, or be in a state of helplessness. So therefore, you as a teacher, you need to guide them. All right, you need to help your learners to revise, refine their work, all right, before the final submission, which will help them, give them some sort of confidence in their work. So whenever you don't really give them some chances to work on revising their work, that can create anxiety or helplessness. That's why sometimes we experience writer's block. That is when you don't know what to say anymore. It's like you just get into a state of like not being able to do anything. So you as a teacher, encourage the learners. It's very, very, very important for us to encourage our learners. And then next, what do we have? Production time. So the good news is that given appropriate stretches of time, a writer can indeed become a good writer by developing efficient processes of achieving the final product. But then also we have to make sure that we just don't, we have to train our learners to know how to benefit from process writing and also benefit from product writing. Do you understand? And it is through now the development of efficient processes that they can become good writer in whatever product that they need to write in the end, either through the process writing or just the product writing. And then the bad news is that many educational contexts demands students or learners writing within a time limit or writing for display, as previously discussed. and that is like for examination. But in reality, though, we have to train them on how to use both processes. I keep emphasizing that because for the most part, though, like most of our context is display context where the learners are examined. There's limit to what they write. They need to demonstrate, like there's no process writing, for instance, is what happens in the real life. But we have to train them on both ways. And then we'll see in the syllabus too that we are encouraged to do both, like the process writing as well as the product writing. And the product writing, I feel like you are very familiar with it. So one of our goal as teachers, we could train our students to make the best possible use of such time limitation, and this may mean sacrificing some process time, for instance, but with sufficient training in process writing, combining with practice of display writing. So this is just what I've mentioned anyway, so that the learners can get used to. For example, in the examination, they don't get a chance to really do the process writing. Their time is limited, and they have to produce the product that is expected of them. And then next, what do we have? Distance. When it comes to writing, you know that, okay, when you speak, all right, when you speak and you are speaking to someone face to face or even over the phone or whatever source of communication you're using, but it's oral communication, you can always get some sort of feedback right away, right? There is some feedback like facial expression if you are face to face. But if it's, for instance, on the phone, when somebody is listening to you, they make some sort of comments to show that they are listening to you, right? But then when it comes to writing, though, it's the opposite. Like you don't have, you don't have an audience to give you some sort of feedback right away. Okay, so now because of this aspect of distance, so the distance factor requires what might be termed cognitive empathy, in that good writers can read when on writing from the perspective of the mind of the targeted writing. So we have to train our learners to kind of write. When they write, they also put themselves in the shoes of the people who are going to read their work. That's why they kind of like need to practice the cognitive empathy, like putting themselves in the shoes, in the minds of the people who are going to read their work. So writers need to be able to predict the audience general knowledge, okay, and then cultural and literal schemata, specific subject matter knowledge, and how their choice of language will be interpreted. So when they put themselves in the shoes of the people who are listening, they need to think about all these things, like who is going to be their reader, okay? What do they know regarding the subject that they are going to discuss? What kind of vocabulary are they going to use that is going to fit the audience that they are addressing? What are their cultural backgrounds? How educated are they? Do you understand? How will people really interpret the display or their writing? So those things they need to consider. But this is something that I find very interesting in when people are addressing certain audience in Namibia. I feel like sometimes we don't think about the audience. It's like if somebody who's going to a village, for example, to address the people, but they will end up using, let's say, English while they can speak the vernacular language. You understand? Or the words or the vocabulary that they use is so, for example, scientific that people don't really understand. That's why in our classes, when we train our learners, we need to train them in such a way that they know their audience. Okay, for the most part, it's like you know your audience, like who you're going to work with or who's going to read your work. And then if you don't know, do research. Like we have to train, because this is a life skill. You cannot go start writing in bombastic words that people will not understand just to show that you know. Do you understand? Because the idea is to communicate. So we need to train our learners to write for the audience that they are addressing. So by doing research on their cultural and literal schemata, if that's possible, or even ask the people. So for example, if you're writing, if they are writing a paper to the magazine, they can always find out like who is the audience, like who is the target of whatever piece of work that they are working on. And in real life, we also have to consider that. So it's a good life skill training to kind of consider because of this distance. But to address this distance, we need to know this information. And then moving on, we have got orthography. Everything from simple greetings to extremely complex ideas is captured through manipulation of a few dozen letters and other written symbols. Sometimes we take for granted the mastering of mechanism of English writing by our students. So if the students are non-literate, but then this is not really like an issue for us, like they are non-literate in their first language, you must then begin from the very beginning. So this part does not really apply to us because we don't work with beginning students unless, let's say, when you graduate and then you work for UNAM at the language center, they have courses, because that's also possible for you, like part-time job. You are just not a teacher, you can always get hired as a part-timer to teach what's that, what is the English, access English or English for beginners, for people who are learning English. That's also possible for you. Then if you're in that situation, then you need to know that if somebody is not educated in their first language, then obviously when you start teaching them, you start with the fundamentals of like reading and writing, starting with alphabet and all that. But then for us in our schools, the school where we're going to teach, that's not the situation. So for the literate students who have got, if their L1 system is not alphabetic, like that's not for us. This is just like for people who are from Arabic background or let's say Chinese and Japanese. They don't use alphabets. They use different systems, characters for the most part. So when you teach them, you have to consider that so that they become very familiar with alphabet. But that's not our situation. And then if the L1 has a different phoneme grapheme system, then you have to train them. But then for us, I feel like when it comes to orthography and writing, we have similar system basically as English. It's just the construction of sentences and how they appear that are different. But then when you teach them to write, some of these differences, you can always notice them, like you can make them aware of them, of these differences, so that when they write, they don't, for instance, direct translate from their native language into English, which sometimes that does not make sense. So those are some of the things that you have to consider for our students, because this is not very much applicable to us. I didn't think about it that much. All right, moving on. Complexity, so this is not really chapter 12, but the complexity of written as opposed to spoken language. So chapter 17 is like about spoken language, and we have not covered that yet. Language was illustrated. We know that when it comes to speaking, I don't know if you have noticed this, when it comes to speaking, it's very simple for you and very easy for you to you can simplify what you say. But then when it comes to writing, you can't really, how do you say? In speaking, you can omit certain words, you can contract words, you can really like simplify things. Like you can even just say a word and somebody will understand. But then when it comes to writing, you have to do so much more than just saying a word to express something. And the body language always helps you when you speak, but that is not afforded in writing. So that's why, when it comes to writing, it's very complex compared to speaking. And then how to create syntactic and lexical variety. So those are things that you notice, like in differences, right, between speaking and writing, and how to combine sentences and more, like you see that there is a difference. In writing, it's more complex than speaking. Sentences combined can pose some difficulty for learners of English. For example, as the short as the shorter sentences and the clauses typically of a spoken language may not be appropriate in written language, like as I've just written mode, as I've just mentioned. And then learning to use coordination, subordination clauses effectively in writing also poses challenges even for native speakers of English. Just imagine, like, native speakers also have difficulties, with creation of coordination and subordinating clauses in their writing. So with our learners, we have to train them, because what do they end up doing really for the most part is like constantly using simple sentences, run over sentences, like so many issues when it comes to writing. But this is not just with our learners, even with the university students. Sometimes we really can't understand what somebody is writing or saying, and you can just imagine now with the learners. So we have to train them, like how to write simple sentences, how to write compound sentences, complex sentences, like how do they create a variety in their language, like in their writing. So we have to train them in that. So there's that complexity aspect to the language, written language. And then next, vocabulary. Okay, we didn't do chapter 17 again on speaking, but written language places a heavier demand on vocabulary use than when it comes to speaking. So good writers will learn to take advantage of the richness added in a wide variety of word choices. And then adding to that, lexical diversity extends well beyond simply looking up synonyms to an appreciation of the nuisance of meaning and connotation of the words in context. So that is just to say, but I honestly appreciate it when somebody's writing, especially the learners, they are writing, but they don't use the same word over and over and over. They try and find synonyms. Like, you have to train your learners to do that. Because in English, usually, like for example, if you use the word, let's say 2 times already in a sentence, try to find the synonym in the next sentence if you're talking about the same thing, right? That's why sometimes also in this book, sometimes they refer to learners and then they refer to students. I mean, there's a difference in some sort, but to diversify the vocabulary situation, like they always use synonyms of some sort. And we have to tell and encourage our learners to do the very same thing. And I encourage you as future teachers to do the same thing, because I try. Honestly, like the things that I, expect students to do for the most part, like I try to do it for myself, because it doesn't make sense for me to tell you practice using a variety of vocabulary when I myself don't do it. When it comes to speaking, I think it's acceptable. That's when you see the difference between spoken language and written language, that you can really easily use the same word when you speak, but when you use different words to mean the same thing, it's good. But when it comes to writing, the written language using the same vocabulary over and over makes the writing a little bit more boring. Yes, practicing what you preach, yes. For the most part, let me be honest too. All right, let's move on. Formality. So whether a student or a learner is texting a friend, writing an academic essay, the convention of written forms are not always easily mastered, because what happens during the examination, for example, and I think it was in the examination report where they say that the learners tend to use what kind of language? Texting language when they write. And I feel like because they practice the texting of language for the most part, they do this more often. Do you get what I mean? Like they really do this more often. So you have to tell them to do, to know the difference when it comes to academic writing and then when it comes to texting language. I see that somebody's writing. I hope. Yeah, and contraction. Yes, 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 yes. Yeah, texting language and contraction of words. Are you good? Yes. Like that is the tendency that the learners do. So you have to make them aware that when it comes to academic writing, you can't do that. But when they're doing informal texting is okay. But then any other kind of writing that there are just certain conventions that are not acceptable. So the most complex convention occur in academic writing, where they have to learn how to describe, how to explain, how to compare, contrast, illustrate, defend, criticize, and argue, all within a certain prescribed style. So because every style changes, right? You have to teach them those differences when it comes to style because when it comes to style, for example, when you're writing for a magazine like informal magazine, the language is kind of formal in a way, but it's not as formal when you're writing for, like, let's say a report in a journal or a research report. There's a difference there. So we have to make them aware. And you can teach them, how do you describe something? For example, if you Google how to describe something, they will give you, options of like how to describe whatever object that you want to describe or situation. Like information is on the internet. Like the internet is your best pal or best friend that you can always consult when you need help in finding out how to do something. There's always information of some sort, but sometimes you have to like dig deeper to find the useful research-based concrete information on how to teach a certain aspects when it comes to language teaching. And there's so much. The good thing is that so many countries around the world, they have researched so much about teaching English, so you can find information on that, except that we have not really done a lot of research. It's up to us now, the younger generation. I don't know if I can consider myself a younger generation, but you guys is younger generation. Like for, but I am. For us to change that for Namibians to start doing research more on like what works in our context. And that will be the point of reference on whatever decision we make in the classroom. Anyways, moving on. I saw that somebody was writing. Are we out of time? Okay, no, we're not out of time. But then they disappeared. And I hope you can hear me. All right, so that's what we had there regarding characteristics of written language. All right, here we go. So before we move on to the next topic, we have a comment by Sylvia. But I think when you encourage them to practice writing words in full, even when texting, makes it more easier for them to be on the right track when it comes to academic writing. That's true. Actually, I don't know, and maybe it comes with me being an English teacher. Like, I don't appreciate it when people don't write full sentences. I don't know why. Like, it's annoying for me a little bit. Like, I love it when people write full sentences when they are texting, or when they avoid certain words. Like, they go, they don't even say, "Are you good? You good?" Like, what the hell? Where is R? So those are just some of the things that I notice about myself. Like, I love when people it's really annoying. Yes, abbreviations are irritating. Yeah, exactly. Like, why do you have to abbreviate? So I'm not a weird person, so I have somebody. I'm kidding. I'm okay being weird. But anyways, it's good to know that there are also other people who do not like certain practices when it comes to writing. I guess it becomes a norm when you teach English, right? But anyways, yeah, thank you for those comments, everybody. Thank you. Like, it really makes sense. Let's move on now. Like, what are you going to do with an extra time? Why not time it out? Yeah, exactly. I agree. Okay, let's move on. The next topic that we're going to cover is micro and macro skills for writing, because in the last class, in the last, not last class, but in the last chapter, we also looked at the macro and the micro skills for reading. Now we are looking at macro and micro skills for writing. So which ones are the macro? We'll start with micro. So produce graphemes and orthographic patterns of English, like you have to do that. And you do that through the user combination of letters and alphabet. Produce writing at an efficient rate of speed to suit the purpose. All right, it depends on what you're writing. If it's a process writing, you have leeway, you have so much more time to do the writing. But then if it's timed writing in situations such as examination, they have to write very fast. And then produce an acceptable core of words and use appropriate word order. Like, yeah, there are certain core words that you have to use, and then they should be in an appropriate order for it to make sense. Use acceptable grammatical systems such as tenses, agreement. So, do you understand by agreement, by the way? And then we've got pluralization, patterns, and rules. So agreement is more like she eats, he eats, yeah, concord basically, yes. And then the patterns and the rules following them that are acceptable, because when it comes to formal writing, for example, academic writing, there are certain grammatical systems that are expected of us, and we are given like we are given I'm blanking out here. We are given blueprint of what we should follow when we are writing, let's say, formal writing. Express a particular meaning in a different grammatical form. Yeah, because there isn't always like one way to say a certain thing. That there are always different ways to express an idea, and then it's good to always use those grammatical forms. So rather than just always, okay, this is just an example, rather than just always like writing simple sentences over and over and over, you can always change it up. And then, okay, you express an idea in a simple sentence, and then the next sentence it will be complex, and then the next one, do you understand, you combine all that, but ideas, I mean, like, you don't always use one type of like sentence in your writing, for instance. I hope I made sense there. Maybe before I even move on, do you get what I mean? Okay, we are moving on now to we are moving on to macro skills for writing. So the macro skills, so remember that the micro skills, they are like the low level, the sentence based type of writing. Okay, like focus on the sentence, the words, let's say the alphabet, the words, the phrases, the sentences. Do you understand? Is always at that level. But then when it comes to macro, it's so much more. Like, because in the previous lesson, previous chapter, we spoke about top down and then bottom up. So the bottom. So these are more the top down skills, like the high level one. So for example, the usage of cohesive devices in written discourse, like you need to use that because it really changes how you write, like how your writing sounds or how your writing reads. Use the rhetorical forms and conventions of written discourse. Okay, conventions like what is acceptable in a type of writing. The structure that is the rhetoric, like the structure that is acceptable for a type of writing. Okay, because we know that a report is addressed in a certain way, an essay is like appears in a certain way, and then if it's for instance, if it's a comparison essay, for instance, the language, the cohesive devices that you use should be appropriate, and then the rhetoric should also be appropriate to whatever convention or whatever type of writing that the learners are doing. So, and then we have got appropriately accomplish the communicative function of a written text according to a form and purpose. Like, you should know your form, like how is that written piece gonna look like, what is the form that you're going to use, and then why are you writing what you're writing, because all of this do help in achieving communicative function. Like, for whatever reason that you're writing, it should show through your writing. And then convey links and communicates such relation in as main idea, right? And then you should also, use supporting ideas, provide new information, give information, generalization, and exemplification in your writing when you are communicating. So you should know, like, main idea. Like, how do you write the main idea? How do you then combine that with the supporting idea? And if you're providing new information, how do you combine that in a sentence? If you're giving extra information or information just in general, then how do you do that? When you are generalizing, like, what kind of language do you even use? When you are giving examples, what kind of language do you use? Such things. And then next, distinguish between literal meaning and implied meaning when writing. So what is literal meaning? Is what is said exactly. Implied meaning, that's what you get when you are reading between the lines. It's not exactly said, but you can assume it from what has been written down, because it's not stated exactly. And I think we had an example, I don't know if you remember, the example that we looked at in reading, whereby what did we talk about when we were talking about literal meaning and implied meaning? Somebody at the window, do you understand? And when somebody, okay, let's say Sylvia is seated at the window, she's wearing her jersey, and then Soyin comes into the class. She's wearing a cardigan, very simple cardigan, right? And when she comes into the classroom, it's very cold. Sylvia is seated at the window, which is wide open. So when Soyin comes in the classroom, she'll go like, "Oh, it's very cold in here." Then Soyin can assume what is Sylvia supposed to? Okay, Soyin comes in the classroom. Oh, wait, who is seated at the window? Soyin comes into the classroom, right? And then she says it's very cold in here. What can Sylvia assume from that statement? Yeah, anybody can answer. What can be assumed? She must close the window. Exactly. That is like the implied meaning. So that's what we mean by that. And then we have correctly convey cultural specific references in the context of a written text. Like, how do you correctly use cultural references? Because there are certain things that are just a taboo. Do you understand? They are a taboo that you cannot use, and that's what we call incorrect usage of cultural specific references. So they should know the differences. Like, what can you say in this culture? Because our country is a multicultural nation. We are from different backgrounds with different cultural upbringing, and it's good, for you as a teacher to expose yourself to all these things that are acceptable and not acceptable. Okay, I'll read that in a second. Do you understand? Like, there are those differences, right? That certain things you cannot say, certain things you can say. You as a teacher expose yourself to those things so that you it's not really so much of expose, but you can sensitize, so it means make your learners aware of these differences. Can you write this is it acceptable for you to write certain things culturally? Is it unacceptable, what are those things that are acceptable and which ones are unacceptable. And we can always use cultural references in our writing, and we have to encourage our learners to do that as well. Okay. And then develop and use battery of writing strategies such as accurately assessing the audience interpretation, using pre-writing devices, writing with fluency in the first draft, all right, and then using paraphrasing, synonyms, soliciting peer and instructor feedback, so getting peer feedback on whatever that they write, and also the instructor, and then using feedback for revising and editing. You understand, like we have this provided to us, but sometimes what do? We wait until last minute to do the writing, that we don't then maximize some of these writing strategies. But we have to train, right? Train our learners to be able to use these strategies. Okay. And then we'll do the rest later.